Catus. Maximus here, this time with a review of the Harbor Freight Warrior compact cordless screwdriver set. Now this is the little electric screwdriver that Harbor Freight has just come out with. Pretty cheap on the shelf. I did use a coupon. I got this for under 10 bucks. Kind of a little bit cheesy, but I figured I'd do a quick review of it because this is Harbor Freight's foray into these little tiny, these would be the 3/16 of the 4mm bit driver. These 4mm bits have become common now because of all the electronics. People have been repairing things like cell phones, laptops, cameras, etc. It used to be these tiny 4mm interchangeable tip precision screwdrivers were pretty rare because you just didn't really find them. The ultimate crux of this review, a nice set of actual precision screwdrivers with proper ergonomics you're going to be best off with. It's going to be just as fast as removing screws as one of these. Now there's a huge amount of variety of these, not just the Warrior, but on Amazon tons of these little electric 4mm drivers. And really I think they're just kind of cheesy. They spin at 100 RPM. This comes with a little tab to prevent the batteries from making contact until you open it. So I pulled that out and you just have a couple rocker buttons with a tiny little motor and gearbox. I will say the spindle is reasonably tight in this unit, so that is nice. It's not wobbling all around, but the power is terrible. Now, I mentioned before, little DC permanent magnet electric motors that have brushes have a timing just like car engines, and they can either be designed to have equal power in forward and reverse, or many corded tools, etc. are tuned to have the maximum power in forward, but when you run them in reverse, you encounter reduced power. This is no different. In reverse, this has much less power than in forward. I mean, I'm barely squeezing on that at all and getting this thing nearly stall, where in forward at least has a bit more power. And I find that, you know, kind of makes sense in some ways because you'll need a little bit more power when you're tightening down screws, but you wouldn't be tightening down tiny little precision screws in a cell phone. And the idea is that you would break the screw and then go ahead and unthread it. And the screws are usually so short and so small that just the poor performance of these is slower than breaking a screw and then using one of these screwdrivers just to spin it out. That's why I generally would only recommend one of these to somebody who really kind of likes these little drivers. Now, I will have to admit the one advantage is it does have a rocker switch here with a reasonably bright LED. So that could be handy in some situations, but that's just about the only saving grace. Really, I think these little electric drivers that are this small and this weak are more of an encumbrance just because they're so difficult to use as a normal screwdriver. You can break a fastener, but if you run out of batteries or something like that, it's much more difficult to try to spin it out by hand. Also, the ergonomics make it an issue where if you have, say, are working on VCRs or those types of equipment, which will have tiny precision screws, but many times they're very tight, that you'll have a hard time really trying to get a good purchase over the top of it just to be able to get enough pressure to make sure you break the screw, or if it has Loctite on it where you have to maintain a lot of constant pressure. This is asking to actually strip out the screws versus having, once again, a normal one, which have a spinning cap so you can maintain lots of pressure, press on the fastener, and then be able to twist it at the same time at maintaining pressure. So another reason I don't like this. It does come with 18 little tips, and they seem to be generally okay. If my camera would focus for once. There we go. Most of the common size of hex, Phillips, flathead, and a little selection of Torx bits. And it is obvious, actually, the Torx bits are up here. These are the three most common size of pentalobe, or 5-point. So this really is for like repairing iPhones and that type of thing. I just think it's kind of a little bit of a waste of money. Some of the other units, like on Amazon, they're a little more ergonomic. They're lithium-ion powered, might be higher power, could be a little bit more useful. But this Warrior is kind of like jumping on the bandwagon of power mini drivers, and kind of a little bit of a mess. Even though they tried with the ergonomics, this is a rubber overmold. Switches are a bit stiff, and the thing is just so gutless. I mean, it's unbelievably gutless. So gutless that I think we just need to tear it down. So let's go ahead and get going to that. Let me clean this up a little bit here. I will mention real fast, I was digging through the bits, and it actually comes with one of these rare, very rare trilobular or triangular bits, which you run into, but they are pretty rare to find, so I'm surprised it came with that. Oh, and before I continue with the teardown, I should mention with 4mm drivers, there are a lot of other options, such as this PT, which uses these double-ended long bits. Really like this as a driver just because it's convenient and ratcheting and gives you a nice handle. This is something that I would prefer to have on a workbench rather than that little electric thing. Or there, plus the fact that it has so many tips that are all just right in the screwdriver. You're not digging through some little set. Or you can get things like the Lennox, which actually comes with S2 steel bits. Is a nice little ratcheting driver. Not, the best ratcheting mechanism, but it has really nice ergonomics, a thick padding on this. Something like this, you're going to be better off in the long term for professional use than, once again, a weird little Harbor Freight driver. One thing I will give Harbor Freight credit for is that they're starting to include their more premium Thunderbolt Magnum batteries when their products come with batteries. And that is at least something. Many products come with batteries, even Harbor Freight, and they used to always come with their terrible quality carbon cells. But now they're at least including alkalines. Let me get a little zoom while we tear this down. And let me interject one more time. I was actually taking a look. Both of these, this is a rigid on the right and the little bit that came with this Warrior set on the left. The machining on the bits is not so great. We can see what a really nice screwdriver looks like. And these Warriors here don't have the best shape, so that's even worse, because if you don't have a really nice, like JIS, Japanese Industrial Standard shape, or really finely and properly machined with close attention paid to the geometry, you're going to be even more likely to strip out little screws using a power driver. Oh, and as I take this apart, I was going to mention that people quit hoarding toilet paper. It's just getting crazy. How can there be weeks of no TP? I mean, what are people stocking up for? It's not like there's going to be an asteroid impact. I mean, it's insane. I would like to see, there's Americans out there who have spent hundreds of dollars on toilet paper in the last few weeks. It's just totally insane. It's even more insane when they get a truckload of TP in and it disappears in like 24 hours. It's like, come on. It's just totally crazy. If you want to hoard something, try hoarding something like these. This Ben & Jerry's bag of just chocolate chip cookie dough chunks only. Those are good. I mean, there's a local kind of discount membership warehouse store, and not only are they out of all TP, they're out of all paper towels, and people even cleaned out all the Scott shop rags out of the automotive section. It was just like, get over it. Seriously. It's not the apocalypse. And that came apart pretty easy. Pretty simple little design. Here's what we got in there. We have an exposed gearbox. It actually looks like all steel gears. Let me get some more zoom in here. Indeed, there's our little gearbox. Let me try to see if I can get the wires in there so we can make it operate. All right, I got a little power supply connected to this. Actually, I think we can just pull, I don't know if this, I see that's just a drive mechanism for the front end, which is all steel. This is actually surprising for how much you're paying, to tell you the truth. It really isn't too bad. Look at those little gears, and if we press the little button, it's actually an impressive little gearbox. Look at the reduction. There's a ton of gears in there. And the brass is kind of self-lubricating, so I assume that's why they did that. It is screwed together and then screwed to the front of the motor, so this whole gearbox and its little cartridge assembly is all part of one unit, so it's one piece. But we just got a ton. How many layers of reduction? Let me count that there. 5 reduction layers. So I'm actually kind of surprised there's even 2 little holes in the front. Like, this motor is a unit that's used in a variety of different electric screwdrivers. Kind of complicated electronics in there. I'm curious if that's just like a little bit of overload protection, which I suspect it may be, because it'd be pretty easy to burn up this little motor. A couple little basic switches there, and then this is a big old toggle, or it's not toggle switch, but one of those permanent on, permanent off switches. And at least they did include a bright LED. And I forgot to demonstrate earlier, maybe I can do that now, is that the LED, God, I hate the way this camera does not focus with it. kind of harder to tell when it's plugged into a power supply, but there's a significant hit to the power, significant power reduction when the LED was on when driving this. But I kind of like this. I kind of dig the little tiny all steel gearbox. I'm kind of surprised, but probably because of the size of this, there's just no way plastic gears were going to work at all. So, one more little look at this gearbox. That thing is neat. All those tiny little gears. They even have some situation here where they have one reduction gear floating on the same post that the spindle is being stabilized by. So you have two gears on one shaft spinning at different speeds, kind of like a little mini transmission. As far as the front end of this, maybe my camera will want to focus a little better now. This is our Sprag clutch. So this is the one-way clutch. So when you use a screwdriver to actually manually break screws, there's a special little design here. And if you try to turn the spindle, it causes these little roller bearings to try to push outwards against this little steel housing, and it prevents it from turning. It's a one-way clutch. However, the part that's connected to the motor, this little piece here, has these forks, and how these work is that the little forks go in between all those bearings. And if the motor is actually pushing on the bearings themselves, then it turns just fine. And this little piece is actually a pretty complicated little cast piece, and it's all integrated. I'm surprised there feels like there's not a drop of even sewing machine oil in this whole unit. So that's something that ought to be done. But that's how it works, is you can turn this little inner collar and you're able to drive the spindle, but the spindle can't drive the collar. And I thought that these are always kind of an interesting setup, these little Sprag clutches. So surprisingly enough, the whole drive mechanism in this entire unit is actually all metal. It's just a shame that it's kind of, it's not just kind of, it is really weak. And these types of drivers really don't provide as much benefit as people think. You know, you get a little electric driver, you think it may be handy or something, and it's really not. With just the poor quality of the bits themselves, and the fact that you're just using this as an excuse to eat up batteries, I think this is probably a product the Harbor Freight should have stayed away from, or should have just had a little more expensive, like a $15 or $20 unit that had lithium-ion batteries and a much slimmer body, so it would have been a more viable item. Even though they did appear to find a manufacturer who's supplying something that's actually pretty decent, there is a bit of complexity in that little gearbox. That is by probably the most expensive part of this whole thing, is that gearbox, not any of the rest of the tool. So just get some normal precision screwdrivers. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody watching and subscribing. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. Until next time, Catus Maximus out.